Before we begin Unit 21, here is the answer to the Unit 20 question. The best answer is choice C.
Cars capable of operating on fuel cells, buildings that take advantage of as much solar energy as possible, and hydropower plants capable of harnessing the energy of flowing water are all examples of green technologies. Nuclear power has a low net energy yield and is not considered a renewable resource and therefore not a green technology. Unit 21. What's the risk in that? If you ever gambled, then you already know about risk.
The term usually applies to the statistical chance that something will happen.
You're taking a bigger risk playing the lottery than betting the same amount of money on a coin toss.
That's because even though the payoff would be greater if you win, the probability of you losing the lottery is greater.
In short, probability determines risk.
Determining acceptable standards for particular hazards in our world is one of the most difficult tasks that environmental scientists face.
This is primarily because different people are willing to live with different levels of risk.
In addition, substances affect different organisms in various ways.
However, many factors need to be considered, analyzed, and evaluated before acceptable levels can be established for substances or activities that pose a threat to the environment and human health and well-being.
We call this evaluation process risk assessment.
You should be aware that the terms toxic and hazardous are not synonymous.
We say that a substance is toxic if it's capable of causing harm.
Toxicity refers to the properties of the substance itself, whereas hazard depends on the level of risk.
A cup containing a toxic poison sitting on the dinner table is hazardous because it's readily accessible.
If the same poison is sealed in an impenetrable container and locked in a cabinet, the risk of exposure is virtually eliminated and a hazard no longer exists, even though the substance is still toxic.
Risk assessment involves evaluating the level of hazard posed.
There are many types of hazards.
Pathogens or disease-causing organisms are examples of biological hazards.
Sulfuric and nitric acids that can be found in our atmosphere and rainwater are examples of chemical hazards.
Natural hazards include events such as fires, floods, and storms.
Cultural hazards include poverty, crime, and unsafe recreational equipment.
Finally, lifestyle choices such as smoking, poor diet, and alcohol use are all considered lifestyle hazards.
Biological pathogens cause infectious diseases.
Those that are contagious are referred to as transmissible.
Viruses are infectious agents that evolve quickly, cannot be treated with antibiotics, and are capable of killing large numbers of people.
Examples of viruses include influenza or the flu, human immunodeficiency, HIV, and hepatitis B, HBV.
Environmental scientists are concerned about emerging diseases as well. The West Nile, Zika, and COVID-19 viruses have garnered much attention in recent years.
The bacterial infection, known commonly as the bubonic or Black Plague, killed millions of people during the Middle Ages.
Until very recently, advances in modern medicine have allowed scientists to keep infections in check and prevent large-scale epidemics.
However, with our ever-increasing population, close proximity of people living together in crowded cities, and ill-advised political involvement, scientists were becoming concerned about the increasing possibility of a catastrophic outbreak. In 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic.
Hopefully, future infectious diseases will be better controlled with improvements in vaccine and disease research, reducing poverty and malnutrition, limiting the overuse of antibiotics, immunization programs, informational campaigns, and an adherence to science and the advice of health experts.
Chemical substances that pose a risk to humans and other living things are considered toxic agents. Carcinogens, mutagens, and teratogens are especially hazardous.
Carcinogens, such as arsenic, formaldehyde, and benzene, are all examples of chemical substances that cause cancer.
Mutagens cause mutations or changes in DNA molecules. Although not always harmful, mutagens can be passed on to offspring, so exposure to them should be minimized and taken seriously.
Teratogens are chemicals that can cause harm to the unborn child. alcohol, recreational drugs, and mercury are all examples of teratogens that have been linked to birth defects.
Neurotoxins are synthetic or artificial chemicals that affect the nervous system of living things. Pesticides that disrupt the normal functioning of the human endocrine system are examples.
Toxicity refers to the level of danger that a substance poses to living organisms. The field of toxicology is the study of harmful chemicals.
The amount of substance that an organism is exposed to is called the dose.
Too high a dose of any substance, even your favorite health food, will make it toxic. For this reason, toxicologists often use the phrase, "the dose makes the poison."
However, given the same quantity or dose, the more harm a substance poses, the greater is its toxicity level.
It's important to understand that the ability of a toxin to pose a hazard is often determined by the manner in which contact occurs.
There are 4 routes of entry by which toxins can enter the body. They are through the lungs, inhalation, through the mouth, ingestion, through the skin, injection, and on the skin, absorption.
Scientists have many methods of assessing the toxicity levels of chemical substances. This data has been compiled and made available to the public.
Although we rely on the government to regulate harmful chemicals, it's still a good idea to be aware of those we are most likely to come in contact with on a daily basis and minimize our exposure.
Biological and chemical hazards are not the only factors that influence our health and well-being.
There are always unforeseen natural physical hazards, such as fires, storms, and lightning, that can certainly negatively impact our lives.
Cultural conditions in which we live, such as our workplace, neighborhood, and economic status, influence our well-being.
There are also the factors that we can control, such as our choices to not smoke, eat healthy, or avoid unsafe physical activities.
This all starts to sound overwhelming, and it is, until you realize that life is all about taking risks.
The key is analyzing the risk and making good choices based on that assessment. This is where the concept of risk management comes in.
Risk management is the process of using the information obtained in risk assessment to arrive at what may be considered to be acceptable risk. This is easier said than done.
The problem is that economics, politics, science, ethics, and social values all play a role in what is considered by society to be an acceptable risk.
For this reason, it's sometimes impossible to arrive at a definite value or standard.
You know that every time you drive to work, you take a risk that you might get into an accident. That's risk assessment.
You also know that losing your job would risk that you might not be able to pay your bills. That's also risk assessment.
When you decide to take the risk of driving into work instead of the risk associated with losing your job, now that's an example of risk management.
You should be aware that American employers are required to evaluate the potential hazards associated with their operations and facilities and must make every attempt to either eliminate or minimize health risks by providing adequate safeguards for their employees.
The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, assures safe and healthful working conditions for employees by setting and enforcing standards and providing training, outreach, education, and assistance.
The field that deals with employee health and safety is referred to as industrial hygiene.
It's important you understand that when it comes to risk management, there can never be zero risk, so guaranteed safety is an impossibility.
The key is to attempt to recognize, assess, and manage all potential hazards so that they may be prevented or eliminated if at all possible. What's the risk in that?
Here is your question for Unit 21.
Toxicology refers to
Choice A, the study of harmful chemicals and their effects on living systems.
Choice B, the statistical chance that something will happen.
Choice C, the evaluation of factors before acceptable levels can be established for substances or activities that pose a threat.
Or Choice D, the process of using the information obtained in risk assessment to arrive at what may be considered to be acceptable risk.
The answer and explanation are provided at the beginning of Unit 22.